The year was 1540, and beneath the glittering facade of Hampton Court Palace, a horror story was unfolding that would make even the most twisted fairy tale seem tame by comparison. While courtiers danced and diplomats smiled, one woman found herself trapped in a nightmare of royal cruelty that began not with treason or adultery, but with something far more devastating in the eyes of a Tudor king. She had failed to arouse his desire. Anne of Cleves arrived in England as a bride, a diplomatic prize meant to secure Protestant alliances and strengthen Henry VIII against his Catholic enemies. What she became was something far more sinister, a living symbol of royal contempt, a woman whose only crime was existing in the wrong body at the wrong time. This is not the sanitized story of the lucky wife who kept her head. This is the brutal truth of systematic humiliation, calculated cruelty, and a king whose own rotting flesh projected its corruption onto an innocent woman. Today, we're diving deep into one of history's most misunderstood royal disasters. The tale of how Henry VIII transformed a respectable German princess into a figure of ridicule, and how she survived by accepting degradation that would have broken lesser souls. By the end of this investigation, you'll understand why Anne of Cleves represents not just personal tragedy, but the complete moral bankruptcy of Tudor England itself. But before we witness the destruction of a woman's dignity, we need to understand the monster who orchestrated it. By 1539, Henry VIII had become something barely recognizable as human. The athletic young king who had once dazzled European courts was now a walking corpse, his massive frame supported by mechanical aids, his legs weeping pus and blood through silk stockings. The sweet smell of decay followed him through palace corridors as courtiers learned to breathe through their mouths in his presence. Medical experts analyzing contemporary accounts paint a horrifying picture. Henry likely suffered from osteomyelitis, a bone infection that would have caused excruciating agony while producing foul-smelling discharge from multiple wound sites. His physicians, operating without understanding of bacterial infection, could only bandage the wounds and prescribe opium that further clouded his already unstable judgment. The combination of physical torment and narcotic medication created a ruler who was both dangerous and completely unpredictable. The king's medical condition affected far more than just his mobility. The chronic infection likely disrupted his hormones and circulation in ways that made intimate relations difficult or impossible. Yet Henry's massive ego prevented any acknowledgement of these medical realities. Instead, he blamed his wives for his own physical limitations, creating elaborate psychological defenses that transformed medical symptoms into moral judgments about feminine adequacy. This was the diseased tyrant who would soon pass judgment on Anne of Cleves, projecting his own bodily corruption onto a woman whose only failing was her inability to restore his shattered masculinity through sheer force of attraction. Meanwhile, across the Channel in the German Duchy of Cleves, a 24-year-old woman was preparing for the role of her lifetime. Anne had been raised in the disciplined court of her brother, Duke Wilhelm, educated in languages, music, and the diplomatic graces expected of noble wives. She understood duty above personal feelings, a trait that would prove both her salvation and her curse in the treacherous world of Tudor politics. The political necessity driving this marriage cannot be overstated. England stood isolated in Europe, threatened by the Catholic alliance between France and the Holy Roman Empire. Henry's break with Rome had cost him crucial allies, and his realm teetered on the edge of diplomatic catastrophe. The Protestant German states offered salvation, and Anne represented the key to this alliance. Her brother commanded respect among Lutheran princes, making this marriage not romantic theatre, but a matter of national survival. Yet even as diplomats negotiated treaties and dowries, Henry's personal anxieties were already poisoning the arrangement. The once confident king now struggled with deep insecurities about his physical decline. He demanded constant validation of his desirability while simultaneously becoming less capable of the intimate performance that might justify such validation. The stage was set for disaster before Anne ever set foot on English soil. The first crack in this doomed union came through art itself. Hans Holbein's portrait of Anne sealed her fate before they ever met. The court painter, renowned for his unflinching realism, had captured the Duchess in traditional Germanic attire, her face serene and dignified beneath an elaborate headdress. To modern eyes, she appears pleasant, even attractive, but Henry's expectations had been inflamed by diplomatic flattery and his own desperate need for validation. The king studied that portrait obsessively, building fantasies that no mortal woman could fulfill. His courtiers, understanding exactly what their monarch wanted to hear, embellished the painting's promise with elaborate descriptions of Germanic beauty and virtue. They spoke of skin like fresh cream and eyes that sparkled with intelligence, creating an impossible standard that would doom Anne before she ever reached England. When Anne's entourage finally reached English shores in December 1539, they brought with them the hopes of two nations and the weight of Protestant alliance. The Duchess herself had prepared for months to become Queen of England. She had studied English customs, practiced the language, and even learned new dance steps to please her royal husband. Her dowry chests overflowed with Germanic treasures that represented her family's wealth and status. The meeting at Rochester shattered all illusions in a single, catastrophic moment. Henry, disguised as a humble messenger in what he believed to be romantic courtly tradition, burst into Anne's chambers expecting to surprise and delight his bride. Instead, he encountered a woman who failed to recognize him, and worse still, failed to swoon at his presence. Anne, raised in the more formal Germanic court, responded with polite confusion rather than passionate recognition. This cultural misunderstanding became the first crack in their doomed relationship. Where Henry expected instant attraction and grateful submission, he found dignified bewilderment. The woman before him, foreign and unfamiliar, failed to validate his carefully constructed mythology of irresistible masculinity. Henry's immediate revulsion was palpable and witnessed by everyone present. His face darkened with barely contained fury as political necessity crashed against personal pride. In that moment, Anne became not just a disappointment, but an active threat to his self-image. The marriage would proceed because diplomatic obligations demanded it, but Henry's cruel campaign against Anne's reputation began that very day. The whispers started immediately. Courtiers who had praised the coming union now murmured about the bride's foreign ways, her unfamiliarity with English customs, her failure to meet their sovereign's refined expectations. These weren't spontaneous reactions, but calculated acts of political theatre designed to provide Henry with justification for his own inadequacies. The wedding ceremony on January 6, 1540, unfolded like a funeral masquerading as a celebration. Henry stood resplendent in cloth of gold despite his deteriorating health, while Anne wore magnificent robes that could not disguise the king's obvious disgust. Foreign diplomats strained to interpret the subtle signs of royal displeasure that rippled through Westminster Abbey's ancient stones. Anne herself maintained regal composure despite the humiliation brewing around her. Trained in Germanic court discipline, she understood duty above personal feelings. Yet she could not have comprehended the depths of English court cruelty that awaited her. This was not a celebration of love or political alliance, but the public degradation of a woman who had committed no crime beyond failing to enchant a diseased tyrant. That night, the royal bedchamber became a theatre of shame that would define Anne's entire experience in England. Henry, whose body now resembled a walking corpse more than a virile king, approached the marriage bed with all the enthusiasm he might reserve for his own execution. His leg ulcers, wrapped in stinking bandages, leaked through silk sheets while he blamed Anne for his own physical revulsion. The consummate performer who had charmed courts across Europe found himself impotent before a woman whose only crime was existing in the wrong place at the wrong time. Unable to acknowledge his own decay, Henry crafted a narrative of feminine inadequacy that would echo through history books for centuries. He complained to his physicians about Anne's body, invented stories about her smell, and suggested ways that her foreign somehow corrupted his natural masculine responses. These lies, whispered in royal chambers and repeated by sycophantic courtiers, transformed a woman's dignity into public entertainment for a court that thrived on others' misfortune. The systematic destruction of Anne's reputation had begun in earnest, and it would only accelerate as Henry's own condition worsened and his need for scapegoats grew more desperate. The court's treatment of Anne revealed the systematic cruelty that defined Tudor governance at its most vicious. Within days of the wedding, courtiers who had once competed for her attention now mocked her Germanic accent with theatrical exaggeration. They ridiculed her unfamiliarity with English customs, turning every cultural difference into evidence of her fundamental inadequacy as a queen. Even her choice of perfumes became fodder for cruel jokes whispered behind painted fans. Ladies-in-waiting, those supposed companions and confidants, transformed into spies and saboteurs. They reported every perceived flaw to Henry's eager ears with the dedication of professional torturers. The Queen found herself isolated in a nest of vipers, where survival meant enduring daily humiliations with silent grace, while her every movement was scrutinized for signs of foreign corruption. Henry's courtiers understood their role in this elaborate performance of royal displeasure. To curry favor with their increasingly unstable monarch, they competed to devise new insults and observations that would validate his rejection of Anne. Her clothing became too foreign, her manners too Germanic, her very presence an offense against English sensibilities. These attacks were not spontaneous expressions of xenophobia, but calculated acts of political theatre designed to provide Henry with the justification he desperately craved. The transformation from queen to scapegoat happened with terrifying speed. Within weeks, Anne had become a living symbol of everything wrong with foreign influence in English politics. Pamphlets appeared suggesting that Germanic women were inherently unsuitable for English men, while court poets crafted verses celebrating the superiority of native-born beauties. This propaganda campaign served a dual purpose, normalizing Henry's rejection while preparing public opinion for the annulment that everyone knew must come. Even worse than the public humiliation was the private torment inflicted by royal physicians who examined Anne's body for evidence of the defects Henry claimed to perceive. These intimate violations, conducted under the guise of medical necessity, represented the ultimate degradation of a woman who had entered England as an honoured guest and ally. The reports from these examinations, carefully crafted to support Henry's narrative, would be preserved in royal records as evidence of Anne's unsuitability. Henry's physicians, terrified of suggesting that royal health might be compromised, collaborated in blaming external factors for the king's obvious decline. They diagnosed Anne with imaginary conditions, suggesting that Germanic humours, or foreign dietary habits, had somehow corrupted the king's natural vitality. These medical opinions show how professional knowledge was subordinated